what should my total budget be for this specific point in time? How much creative output and what should the breakdown of that creative output be in order to achieve that necessary budget allocation or efficiency goal? And then what is the true revenue contribution of each of my channels, and what should the testing roadmap be to sort of reinforce that? There encapsulates what could represent maybe 50% of the time spent in conversations and workflow around these things. That we've put a lot of time into sort of consolidating what we see working best and create toolings around answering these questions that we don't see working other places. And so our answers to those questions exist in 3 different models: the spending power model, the creative demand plan, and then our testing roadmap tool.
This episode is brought to you by data ships. Here's a problem most brands don't realize they have. The way you're collecting marketing consent is costing you tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars every month. If you're using default consent settings on Shopify checkout, you're probably only getting about 40% of your paying customers subscribe to email and SMS marketing. That's a massive missed opportunity because customers subscribe to marketing deliver over 2 times higher lifetime value to your brand. Dataships solves this by using AI to optimize the way you collect consent. They automatically adapt the consent experience based on your shopper's region, consent status, suppression history, expected LTV, and more, maximizing opt-in rates while keeping you compliant with every privacy law in the world. Brands using Dataships average 81% global opt-in rates and unlock $65,000 per month in incremental lifetime value. It works for Young LA, Ruggable, Ancestral Supplements, and over 600 Shopify Plus brands. Don't let checkout defaults or legal uncertainty stop you from marketing to the highest number of customers possible. Install Dataships and let them handle the rest. With AI-optimized consent and real-time compliance management that sends bigger, higher-quality customer audiences directly into your email and SMS tools. Go to dataships.io/demo to learn more and start your free A/B test to see your actual incremental LTV uplift. That's dataships.io/demo.
Hey folks, welcome to the E-commerce Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Confident Collective. And I'm joined today by our VP of E-commerce Strategy, Mr. Luke Austin, who's going to walk us through some very exciting offer we have today. I'll just be upfront with it. We're going to kind of break down for you exactly what we want to do for 8-figure e-commerce brands today. But Luke, what's going on, man?
Oh, let's see. This time of year, my daughter's a little over 2 now, and so I'm beginning to understand how, especially at this time of year, there are just like sub-sicknesses, sub-viruses that get created in these groups of 2 to 4-year-olds. That is, you'll deal with something for a few days and then get out of it, and then there's like some new sub-strain of something that 2 little 2-year-olds with their combined green snot concocted at the park. So always a joy waking up with something new to tackle on that front, but just the time of year, I guess.
There you go. Like an endless cycle of contagion, basically. That's what's happening out there.
Exactly.
But, all right. Well, let's jump straight into it then. So, first, what I want to frame up here is there's, and maybe I'll kind of use this framework that you shared with me, Luke, but a lot of the times, the 3 kind of main questions that CMOs have, that owner operators have, the people in the e-commerce space who are in charge of these decisions have, is A, what should my total budget allocation be? And then given that, how much creative should I be making? And then what's the true contribution of those channels? Which really all kind of boils down to one question, which is where should I be spending my money? And is it getting me anything? And for a long time, those questions are really, really difficult to answer in any way that was any more than heuristic, but we've developed a system to help get really precise about what your budget allocation should be. So Luke's going to walk through that a little bit. And I want to say up front as well, that this system that we're about to lay out for you, we are currently offering to do this for you for free if you are 10 million and up e-commerce brand in terms of annual e-commerce revenue. So keep that in mind while you're listening, that this too could be yours. So I'll turn it over to you, Luke. Given that that's kind of the big question on people's minds, talk a little bit about what this system is and kind of the contingent parts of it.
Yeah. So the unique position that we have in the world is sitting at the intersection of hundreds of D2C e-commerce brands worth of data. But the subset of the hundreds of brands that we have the pleasure of partnering with is we get to see into the workflows, the organizational structures, the toolings of all of these D2C e-com brands between 10 to 100 million plus. And It's one of the most fascinating parts about what we do because not one is like the other, at least at some point in time. There's so much variance in terms of the leadership founding structure, the operating team structure, the workflow, the meeting cadence, the communication styles, the tooling, the methodologies used to determine the decision making, and it's really fascinating. And so we see it as a big part of our role is to be able to identify in the context of that what are the things that we see being most effective and to assemble the best pieces of the workflows and the structures and the toolings and to also identify where we're having conversations and spend a lot of time partnering with owners and operators having these conversations, identify where there's gaps that exist in the space, and then be able to create solutions to solve the problems that we're working to solve on a day-to-day basis with our partners. And so this questioning around these three buckets, what should my total budget be for this specific point in time? How much creative output and what should the breakdown of that creative output be in order to achieve that necessary budget allocation or efficiency goal? And then what is the true revenue contribution of each of my channels, and what should the testing roadmap be to sort of reinforce that? There encapsulates what could represent maybe 50% of the time spent in conversations and workflow around these things that we've put a lot of time into sort of consolidating what we see working best and create toolings around answering these questions that we don't see work in other places. And so our answers to those questions exist in three different models: the spending power model, the creative demand plan, and then our testing roadmap tool. And so we built those tools out, and the sort of methodology that we see against it, as well as the work that our data science team puts into creating these models on behalf of each individual brand is really, really unique in helping us to answer these questions that we spend a lot of time on. And most people, I'm sure, listening and engaging with this content spend a chunk of their brain power on trying to answer those three questions in the most effective way possible.
Well, I mean, I think it's a good call out to say that what part of what this does for you is eliminate some of that thought work, right? Like it takes, like if you're saying that there's that much time allocated to thinking through these things without really knowing exactly what you're doing, a lot of what these models do for you is kind of eliminate that, give you sort of kind of automatically generate the best practice for your specific brand, and then you're able to follow that roadmap. So that being said, let's kind of get into the specifics. So the first piece of this is our spending power model. Now, if you listen to this podcast, we've talked about this a lot, so we don't necessarily have to dive deep on it, but for the sake of this particular episode, we'll kind of tease out a little bit what that does for you. Give us a quick overview.
Yeah. So the spending power model is at a high level an ensemble model that looks at a number of different models of historical spend degradation, the seasonality impact. We'll look at consumer confidence index that we build, and we'll integrate that into the spending power model. We'll look at categorical competitive search trends related to brands and ensemble the model, and to get us to the highest predictability in terms of what your spend degradation curve looks like. So what the degradation of your spend at different intervals looks like in terms of the impact on your revenue and contribution margin outcome. And so for the spending power model and the rest of the things we're going to talk about, I think what we've spent a lot of time trying to do is to build tools that, yes, allow for effective planning and forecasting, because I think there's so many decisions that we need to make on a day-to-day basis that if we don't have a solid foundation and ground underneath us of the forecast and the plan, then it's really hard to know how much inventory to purchase or hiring and resourcing, et cetera. But the more important part, and the thing that we'll say, which is like forecasting is more of an exercise in execution than in planning, is being able to build tools that allow for action and operation against them rather than a focus on just the prediction and the output of it. And so the spending power model, how it ties with that is the spending power model orients around three different optimizations in terms of business objectives that we can sort of have conversations around to start out. The first is maximizing contribution margin. So maximizing contribution margin in the first month of your new customer cohort. So I want the maximum amount of contribution margin dollars from my new customers in this specific monthly time frame. We've got a brand example up here for anyone visually following along, but we'll chat through it. And we're looking at, as an example, February of 2026 for this business, max CM, the recommendation has been $142,000 to drive a little over $1 million in new customer revenue at a 7.04 AMER. So that's max CM. The next selection would be sort of on the other end, which is maximize new customer revenue. So I want the maximum new customer revenue at break even contribution margin. And the recommendation for the spend in this scenario is $525K at a 1.25 to drive 1.25 million in new customer revenue at a 2.39 AMER. And then the final selection would be max lifetime contribution margin, which is I want the maximum contribution margin, but I'm willing to wait against a longer time horizon, 30, 60, 90, 120 days to realize the potential of that, which is going to allow us to index more spend, right, than the max CM scenario to drive that. And so in this case, what I want to pull out most is the distinction between the max contribution margin and then the max revenue scenario for this business. So the max contribution margin, as a reminder, the recommendation was to spend $142K to drive $1 million, $1 million and two in new customer revenue. Maximize revenue would be spending $525K. So that is $380,000 of additional ad spend to drive $250,000 more in new customer revenue. That's the trade-off between these scenarios, is to spend $380K more to drive $250K more in new customer revenue. That is a bad trade-off taken in the context of this lens. Now, there's all sorts of things in terms of halo effect on Amazon and retail impact, et cetera. But if we're looking at .com primary business, and this is the lens which we're focusing around, that trade-off is not one worth making. It's very negative AMER for that additional $380,000 in spend. And so what this does for us is not primarily to illustrate let's spend less money and just reap the additional contribution margin in this time period. That may be the case for many brands, but the problem is we need to push for growth, and particularly we need to make sure our new customer revenue is at least comping year over year, if not growing year over year, or else that's going to show up in our returning customer cohort at some point in time, especially for this business that has about a little over 80% LTV in 1 year. It's really substantial, especially for its category. And so the primary objective here is to understand what the trade-off in the efficiency curve is so that we can know how much of the investment dollars we should take from our sort of core paid media investment and reinvest into new channel growth areas. So if I'm looking at this as the owner, operator, decision maker against this business, then I am likely going to orient around the max lifetime contribution margin scenario rather than the maximize revenue scenario, right? Like I'm going to spend $200,000 in spend instead of $400,000 or $500,000. Maybe trade off $100,000 or $200,000 in new customer revenue, but make a lot more contribution margin, right? And then what I'm going to do is challenge myself and my team to say, okay, instead of pushing for break even on new customer revenue AMER like we have been, what we're going to do is we're going to take that $200,000 of ad spend we would have spent otherwise and reinvest it into areas to produce growth or to improve our efficiency degradation, increase our spending power is how we think about it. And that's what makes this model actionable is we are able to do this exercise. Okay, we're going to take the $200,000, we're going to reinvest it into creator content, UGC, street interview style videos, reinvest it into bringing on an agency or partner to help us stand up on TikTok shops and do creator distribution, create moments out of that. You can go on down the line, right, of like what are the units of growth we're going to invest this in that is going to be in the context of net new channels, so channel expansion, creative, and email. Like those are sort of the three buckets, right? So reinvest those dollars into creative ways in those areas with the goal of improving your spending power or improving your percentage over model. And so every month we're able to see the spend AMER model, what the plan was heading into the month, and then we actualize it at the end of the month to see how much over or under the model's expectation did we land. So all those things we did, the new TikTok shops launch, the additional creative volume, these new creative formats, did that improve our percentage over model by 5%, 10%, 15%? Because what that does is it allows us then in March to be able to expect to perform 10, 15% over model again and continue to push that forward. So now we have an anchoring of this is the amount of spend we need to get to sort of that baseline. This is the amount that we can reinvest into these new growth initiatives with the goal of improving our spending power or moving us further along this efficiency degradation curve. And that's how it helps us to, yes, be predictable in the month around the objective, but to operationalize the activity that we're going to do in the context of the model and try to beat and improve against the model through that activity.
If you're still using Shopify's default checkout consent box, you're leaving tens of thousands of dollars on the table every single month. Here's what most brands don't realize. Only about 40% of your customers are opting into marketing with default settings. That means 60% of your paying customers can't be marketed to, and they deliver 2.4x lower lifetime value because of it. Dataships fixes this with AI consent optimization. They automatically show the right consent experience to each shopper based on their region, consent history, and expected LTV, maximizing opt-in rates while keeping you 100% compliant globally. Brands using Dataships average 81% global opt-in rates and unlock $65,000 per month in incremental LTV. Young LA, Ruggable, Ancestral Supplements, and over 600 Shopify Plus brands trust Dataships to grow their owned audiences. Sound too good to be true? See for yourself with Dataships' free A/B test. Just go to dataships.io/demo or click the first link in the description below.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think one way to summarize this that I've maybe used before when we talked about this is like, at the most simple level, what this tells you is when you're wasting money, basically. It tells you at what point you're spending too much on the current set of ad platforms that you're spending on. So by one of, like, if you're optimizing for, let's say, contribution margin, this will tell you at what point the next sort of tranche of spend, like the additional $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever that you're spending in platform, starts to degrade that rather than contribute. And then same with new customer revenue, at which point does it drop MER below zero, and so on and so forth. Same with max lifetime contribution margin. So the idea there being like, very quickly, this will tell you when you shouldn't be spending any more money on your current set of ad platforms and when that money can be used elsewhere. So let's jump to our kind of the next piece of the puzzle here, which I believe is the creative demand.
Yes, creative demand model. So how one of these exercises could look to sort of like pull the line through, again, is we say, okay, rather than pushing that additional $50,000 in spend that we might have done previously just to like drive the revenue up and it was really low MER, we're going to take that $50,000 to spend. And one of the areas we're going to invest it in is increase creative volume through net new creative formats and types against additional marketing moments and products, right? So increased creative output in additional creative formats and types against those items. So if that's the exercise, then what we're wanting to make a plan against is what is the baseline of creative output needed, and then what is the additional investment we're making above that to see what the impact is against our efficiency curve. So the creative demand model is what we have built to help us get a better sense of what is the necessary amount of creative output to hit that baseline expectation of our spend goal. And the creative demand model is built around 5 key metrics that we look at and build this model for each brand specifically. So the first metric that we look at is zero revenue rate. So this is the percentage of active ads that never converted during the measurement period. High values indicate many ads are not effective. And so and then each of these metrics, what we're benchmarking them against our data set of hundreds of D2C e-commerce brands. So for this business in particular, their zero revenue rate is in the 91st percentile, which is really great. It's a really strong outcome. This is like one of the metrics that's a strong point. The second metric is ad concentration. So this is the percentage of total ad spend concentrated in the top 5 performing ads. You don't want to be too over-reliant, right, on a few ads. So 15% of the spend in this account is concentrated against those ads. When it starts to become problematic is when a third of your spend or half your spend is concentrated in just a few ads. So this brand is in the 87th percentile of ad concentration. That's a strong point. The next 3 metrics are where this business struggles relative to the data set. And the third metric is ROAS degradation. So this is the change in ROAS after the initial launch week. The fourth metric is spend degradation, the change in daily ad spend after the initial launch week. And then the fifth metric is evergreen share, the percentage of ads that have been running consistently for 30 plus days. These are your evergreen ads. They provide the stable baseline for the account. And so this business, zero revenue rate and ad concentration are in that percentile. The 3 metrics that are more challenging, ROAS degradation, spend degradation, and evergreen share are are the challenge. And all of these metrics then culminate in a combined creative score. And this creative score exists on a benchmark between where 50 is the midpoint. So if you have a creative score of 50, what that's going to indicate is that you need the same amount of creative volume output to achieve the same spend objective as you would have historically had to hit. So said another way, in February of 2026, if your business has a creative score of 50 and you're planning to spend the same amount in February 2026 as you did in February 2025, you're going to need about the same amount of creative volume and output. If your creative score is above 50, that indicates you're going to need less creative volume and output than you did historically to achieve the same spend target. And below 50, you're going to need more. Your creative is getting less impactful. And so what this allows us to do is identify where our creative score is relative to that baseline and try to improve that creative score over time, right? So what we're wanting to see is that if we're starting with a creative score of 45 in this brand's case, that we are going to increase the creative volume through new creative formats against new products, new marketing moments, different split of video imagery, etc. And the whole objective is that the creative score, when at the close of February, when we rerun the model, that it shows up as a 50 or 55, that we've improved it against the 45 creative score. And how that's going to show up most likely is one of the three metrics that are below benchmark for this business. So ROAS degradation, spend degradation, evergreen share. One or more of those metrics is going to increase, which is going to lead to that creative score getting above 50. And in that way, now we have a game set up that we can go play as it relates to creative volume and creative output. That we'll acknowledge there's a lot of wiggle room as it relates to the understanding of creative volume and what's diverse versus not. But if we constrain it around this idea of improve the creative score, and here's the 5 metrics that we're looking at that improve the creative score, then that's the objective we're after. The folks that are responsible for creative output and the performance of the creative for the business then have an objective that they're after in improving that score. And how we get there, there's going to be all sorts of ways we get there, right? Additional creator content, additional imagery against these evergreen products that we haven't supported in the past. There's a bunch of levers that we can pull to get there, but now we have something that we can measure against it, identify how much that activity moved the creative score over time, and then try new things to continue to try to improve the creative score.
So again, to do then kind of like a layman's quick summary of this, the idea here is if the first kind of report is, or rather the spending power model is meant to show you when you're starting to waste money on platform, what this is showing you is how many ads you need to make to maintain the status quo, or rather to hit the spend target that you have set. If, for instance, your creative score is low, that means that you're going to have to do a little bit more than usual. If it's high, you're going to have to do a little bit less. So if this is relevant, I think it'd be interesting to dig into the moments ad planning piece, because this gets into the sort of element that each month is going to have to look somewhat different anyway because of marketing moments, but maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So the creative demand model gives us at high level, here's our creative score, here's the total amount of output needed. So for this business in February 2026, we need 217 total ads. So far in February, a few days in, we've created 16 have been created, right? So that's where we're at relative to the objective. And that's the gap we need to bridge. 217 total ads needed for this month. Then the question becomes, okay, yeah, what is the decomposition? What is the breakdown of that creative volume? And where is the agreed upon plan for how and when and by whom that's going to be delivered? And so the creative plan, we break down into 2 main subsections: moments ad planning and evergreen ads planning. So moments ad planning is going to be the creative that you're delivering that is connected to a marketing moment on your calendar. These are going to be unique things that are happening this month. The new product that you're launching, the promotion that you're running, the influencer drop, the VIP giveaway, whatever it is, right? Like these are the marketing moments that need creative output over the course of the month. Evergreen ads planning is going to be all oriented around products or categories. And these are going to be ads that are going to be able to be run over a longer period of time and not tied to a marketing moment or a marketing calendar. So moments ad planning for each of those buckets, then we identify every single marketing moment over the course of the month. We integrate it. This ties directly with the marketing calendar that's integrated in StatList, and identify for the marketing moments we have planned, what products are going to be focused on for those marketing moments. So if it's just like site-wide all products, great, we have that. If it's specific categories, or if it's specific subsets of products, those get identified. Then from there, we identify who is producing that. So we have different selections for if the brand or the client is producing that versus if we are producing that, if we're producing that in a branded ad format or a creator content UGC format. So we have clarity of who's producing and delivering that. And then we break that down into video versus image. So our model runs and looks at your video and image historical performance and then creates a recommended split of the total assets. What should the split be between video and imagery based on prior performance? And then we track the delivery of those things. So we create the plan. Here's each of the marketing moments and each of the products that we're going to be creating ads for. Here are the products or categories that they're going to be focused on. Here's the producers who are responsible for delivery. And then here's the amount of videos and images for each one of those things. And then once they're delivered, they get tracked. And so we can see against the 217 total ads for this month, here's a specific plan of what they're being created for, by whom, in what time frame, video versus imagery, etc. And then track as those ads get launched in platform, we can track the delivery against that goal.
Right. So in other words, it takes it obviously like it's simplistic to say that this just shows you how many new ads you need. It also shows you or allows you to kind of execute on exactly which ads are going to be for what, whether they're evergreen, whether they're for specific moment. So in all, it's sort of a completely actionable report and not just merely a model. So speaking of actionable things, I think let's jump then into the incrementality roadmap, because this, I believe, is going to be relatively new. So we've talked on this podcast about these first two models a few different times. So apologies to those who've heard it before. We've talked about incrementality a lot, but we haven't specifically dug into the way that we are modeling and then kind of building an actionable plan around that. So Luke, why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah. So just like the conversations around creative, which is like, how many ads do we need and against what moments and products and what formats? And there's a lot of ambiguity and lack of clarity related to what's informing that decision making and then the plan against it. So just like the creative demand model and plan is helping to solve for that, the same sorts of conversations exist related to measurement roadmaps and testing roadmaps on the media channels. And in our experience, what happens when there's ambiguity related to either of these things, the whole creative workflow or the measurement testing workflow, is that what it leads to in more cases than not is not actually like an abundance of activity and chaos, is it leads to inaction in most cases, where everyone's just like sort of at a standstill because there's more questions than answer and there's not agreed upon framework for how we determine these things. So there's like 7 channels we want to test and all sorts of interesting questions we have, but then for months we just end up talking about these things and not actually doing any one of them. And same with the creative workflow, where it's like, oh yeah, there's probably new formats we should explore, but like who's responsible and how does it like, and so it's like, well, let's just keep creating the 50 ads that we have for each month and like using the same designers we have and not looking at other, partners or ways to get there. And so as it relates to the testing roadmap, what we've built, and I have here up on the screen and I'll talk through is our incrementality roadmap. And what we do, the core thing that we're trying to get at is which channels and tactics should you test first, and then the sequence of your remaining channels and tactics in your media mix based on the potential revenue impact in the worst and best case scenarios for each. So what I mean by this is we have a database of incrementality tests that from our customer subset where we can see the upper and lower bound of incrementality results for each channel and tactic. So for meta acquisition, for example, let's say as an example that the on the lower end, we have seen tests as low as a 0.3 incrementality factor for meta acquisition, which would be really low, right? So meta 7-day click acquisition 0.3 on the worst case. And then best case, we have seen tests come back as high as a 2.8 or 2.9 incrementality factors, right? Just as an example. So it's a really wide range of the incrementality that brands see. And so we can take an average of all of these tests as a starting point. So that's great. Like that's probably the best starting point if you're going to use anything for the measurement, is use like an average benchmark, but it doesn't account for how wide the distribution could be. And if you're closer to the worst case than the best case, like there's millions of dollars in between those upper and lower bounds that the channel could be impacting for you. So for this business specifically, Meta acquisition is top priority channel for them because right now the platform is reporting 2.5 million in on-platform reported 7-day click revenue for their Meta acquisition campaigns. In the worst case, that 2.5 million platform revenue could actually be 1.5 million in incremental revenue against a little over $700,000 in spend. So at that point, we're getting really close, and on some categories, potentially already at the level of negative contribution, right? So worst case, 1.5 million in revenue against that 711K in spend. Best case scenario is the revenue that Meta acquisition is driving could be closer to $4.6 million if they're at the towards the upper bounds of the incrementality based on our data set. So 1.5 million to 4.6 million. So that's a $3.1 million swing between the upper and lower bounds of this is unaccounted for, undefined revenue right now. As the decision maker against the indexing the resources against this business and where I'm going to put budget, like if there's a $3.1 million swing between what this channel could be contributing, that is one of the biggest problems to go solve, to get clarity against that, to know what the actual incremental impact of this channel is, and then go on down the line. The second channel in this list is TikTok. On the low end, it's 590K of revenue. On the upper limits, it's 1.77. So that's a $1.2 million swing. So that's why it's second on the list, right? Instead of $3.1 million swing, it's 1.2. Still a lot of money to go and get clear on, but less than Meta, and then on down the line. And that's how we use the incrementality testing roadmap to sequence the prioritization of tests between each of the channels based on the upper and lower bound incrementality factors that exist in our data set.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I was going to say, like, to be clear, what this is prioritizing is how urgent it is for you to test this, essentially. And there's the idea here. So obviously that there's just this enormous range that Facebook acquisition could be in terms of its incrementality. So the idea is then we'll test that, and then would this report kind of narrow down the bound as you get closer and closer to what you're looking for?
Yep.
And then at that point, it would drop it down the priority list as you get more and more clarity on incrementality. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. So as we can see sort of in the right, we have in the right-hand column here the tests that have been run for each of these channels. So for this business, we don't have any tests run, but for others we do. And so as we go through, we'll say, okay, Meta acquisition is at the top of the list. We're going to stand up a geo holdout, inverse holdout, incrementality test, run through that. Once that test is finalized and at stat sig, p-value of 0.1 or better, then we get the clear incrementality read. We get a check mark against this channel. It's been validated. It drops to the bottom of the list, right? And then TikTok acquisition is now, then it's Google Ads brand, then it's Google Ads non-brand in that order.
Right. So primarily like what the action that is actionable from this is testing priority, but presumably there's also other decisions that can be made off of this. For instance, we can see from this particular report that branded search on Google is almost definitely over-reporting by a lot.
Yeah.
So did that then indicate we should be pulling back there, or we should be pushing it, or like what kind of like second tier actions can you take based on this report?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Google Ads brand, there is a range for Google Ads brand that's illustrated here, but what Google Ads brand for this business is currently reporting is way outside the range, right? Which is what you're referencing. So what we do as a starting point is at any given point in time, you want to use the best representation of truth that you have at that point in time, right? Like, we're going to use the best test result that we have available and action against it until we have another data source that indicates different. And so for us, the starting point is using our benchmark incrementality factors, which are against each of these channels. It's looking at a benchmark factor that more represents the average test result for these channels. So for Meta acquisition, the benchmark incrementality factor is a 1.2. For Google Ads brand, it's a 0.3. So we're going to use those starting point factors immediately. To your point, like Google Ads brand is most definitely over-reporting relative to even that range. What we're going to do is for every single channel, use the benchmark incrementality factors. That's going to represent more of a midpoint, and we're going to action against that. So for Google Ads brand, that would look like adjusting the ROAS target and platform to be in line with that factor. And most likely that's going to result in that channel having to run more efficiently and likely at lower spend volume, and then reallocate those dollars elsewhere. But then when we actually run an incrementality test for this brand, for Google Ads brand as a channel and tactic, whatever that factor is overwrites the incrementality factor that we're using as the baseline, and then that's what we're using as the best representation of truth moving forward to action.
I think that's a really great point too. Like that with this particular example of the way that you're probably overspending on Google ads. You don't actually know that. So that's worth acknowledging to say that like it's totally possible, or it's within the realm of possibility maybe that your Google brands really is returning $3 million, at 3.2 mil rather than 1.6, which is the upper bound of this particular, of our kind of average incrementality factor here for Google or incremental revenue. But so it is possible that it would be a mistake to pull back. However, this is the best information that you have right now. So yeah, you are rolling the dice to some extent, but you are making the right choice based on probability that like the Google branded is most likely overspending here. So once you can narrow that down, you'll get a little bit clearer, but at least for decision-making purposes now, that's the thing that you should go off. Yeah.
That's right. And I think what's maybe to take this a little more high level as well, which is part of the challenge here is that I think it's more comfortable to not make a decision than to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what I believe and this is what we're going to action against. And so, but what I want to say is in not making a decision, you are making a decision, right? Against these things. Like if we were to say Google Ads brand, no, I don't trust the incrementality baseline factor. I'm not gonna trust an incrementality reading for Google Ads brand until we run a geo-holdout test for our channel and our business specifically, right? So that could be someone's initial approach. In which case, what you're saying is you're going to operate off of some other indication of measurement and belief rather than the baseline factor in the meantime. Maybe it's platform reported revenue. Like I know I actually do believe the platform reported revenue is the 3.3 million that's happening here. You are making a decision at that point that you are using the platform reported revenue based on the attribution model that Google uses as your indication of what is actually happening rather than the incrementality baseline. And this may sound very like, like, of course that's the case, but we run into these conversations and have to work through this so many different times with the partners that we work with folks in our team as well, where that is choosing to not use the incrementality baseline factor is making a choice to use a different measurement source. And it may seem, I think it seems safer to people because that's sort of just like what we've been doing. And so like if something goes wrong, there's not going to be implication or blame associated with it because that's what we've been doing historically. So let's just like keep it there. But by making a decision to not move to the incrementality baseline factor and to keep using that thing, you are making a choice that is the better signal. And so in this, like what we're after is a clear decision-making framework against these things so that we can all agree upon it and make decisions in line. And we're pushing our people as well, equipped with these tools to be courageous in making these decisions because it is a courageous decision for a business that has been, let's say, looking at on-platform reported or whatever attribution model reported factor for Google Ads brand, for someone to say incrementality benchmark is going to be our best source of truth. And we know it's going to be wrong, actually. We actually know it's going to be wrong once we run an incrementality test for this business in the future, but it's going to be more right than the current thing. That can be an uncomfortable decision and conversation. And it's courageous to sort of sit in that middle gray area of like, we know this isn't the fully right thing and we won't get the fully right thing for 2 months from now until we can run that test. But this is the better signal. And we're willing to use that and put our stake in the ground at this point. And that's our encouragement to our people in these conversations is to move towards the better indication of the better signal, the better indication of what the actual contribution is of these things. Even with the creative demand model, like, do I really need 217 ads? Like that seems like a lot. We're making 50, like that over 100 ads, right? It's like, that's not the point. The point is make more ads in more new formats for more marketing moments and more evergreen products, right? So if it's 150 instead of 50, instead of 217 instead of 50, that's fine. At least make a movement in that direction towards the thing that has the higher likelihood of being impactful for the business.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think that's a good point that we may well be wrong that there's a 0.3 incrementality factor on this branded search. However, every single basically every single test that we've run indicates that Google branded search is always wrong, and it's always over reporting, more or less. So in this case, that seems like the better game. But maybe a way to kind of tie it all up is what this is giving you is a way to make leaps of faith require a little less faith, or to have like a little more clarity that you can make the jump. And so anything else that you want to kind of hit on these three models here?
No, I don't think so. I think if there's ambiguity that exists in your organization, or if you're feeling a lot of time spent wrestling with this, or varied perspective as it relates to any of these questions, or even just the exercise of like, if someone were to come in and ask you versus two other people who are your peers or on your team, what should my total budget allocation be? How much creative do we need for this month to be able to get there? And then what channels are we testing next and why? If anyone would answer those questions differently between a small group and your team, which in most cases I would bet is the case, I'd encourage you, let us build these models for you and give you some clarity, and at least be helpful for you in the midst of those conversations.
Yeah. And as Luke is alluding to, let us build these models to you. We're doing it for free. If you are a 10 million and up brand, you're in the 8-figure range, we will do this for you for no cost, which is, in my opinion, a crazy deal, but we're doing it right now. So for the next little bit here, we will be doing that. Please reach out to us, commonforco.com, smash that hire us button. Let us know that you're interested in building these three models for you to provide that clarity that you may be lacking right now, and we'll gladly do it for you. All right, that's going to do it for us for this week. For both of us, take care, everybody, and we'll see you